Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Rev War Revelry. We have a special treat here today as we enter into the 250th of the American Revolutionary period. We have Joel Bohy here, who's co-author of a great book called Bullet Strikes, if I can get it not to be blurred, but Bullet Strikes from the first day of the American Revolution. And if there's someone who shouldn't know about this, it is actually a native of Concord, Massachusetts. I've learned to say that correctly. Being from Baltimore. We want to go Concord, but that's not it. So he is an active consultant with the National Park Service, so we love that. And then also a regular contributor to Antique Roadshow, so you may have seen him already. So we appreciate you, Joel, putting your reputation on the line and joining us here on Rev War Reverie. But welcome and thank you.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for the invite. Any chance I can get to talk about April 19th or ballistics or bullet strikes or any of that stuff is great. So happy to do it.
We don't get much. I liked one of the quotes that said in the book, material traces of the tumultuous day has often been neglected. And so, was that a line that you wrote? Was that a co-author wrote? So we'll just get started on why a book on material traces on April 19th.
Well, I mean, we both talked about this stuff a lot as we started to get into the project. I mean, it originally started with Parker's Revenge, the archaeology project, and in 2013 we we were out there working, and I met Dr. Doug Scott, who's the co-author and great friend and now colleague, and we were finding musket balls and we wanted to know more about the ballistics. We had done some shooting and stuff. So we started doing a lot of live fire studies where we would shoot metal detect the balls, recover each one, bag it, tag it, record all the data, photograph it, try and figure out all the markings, how they happen. And one day I was at the Arlington Historical Society looking at some objects in their collection, and I started to look at the bullet holes in the Jason Russell house. Now I'd been there hundreds of times and looked at some of the bullet holes. And after doing all this ballistics work, we started looking at it in a different light because we'd look at, oh, wait a minute, if a bullet went here, it had to go here. And we all of a sudden started finding more bullet holes that nobody ever knew were there. So that was one of the interesting things, that people do go and visit those places like Arlington Historical. They go through the Jason Russell House, or they've been to Buckman Tavern in Lexington and seen the Buckman door, but they just don't think it's just a bullet hole. But what we tried to do is record all of the bullet strikes that survive, and talk about some of the ones that don't anymore, and look at them in the trying to understand the battle in a better way. I mean, we can all pick up Fisher's book or, Coburn or one of the others and read about the battle, but to actually look at it through archaeology and the bullet strikes that remain was something that nobody had ever really done before. And we thought people might think it was interesting.
Oh, especially because you hear, I mean, about the numbers of men engaged, or even a little bit of weaponry. We can get into the weaponry a little bit later, but you don't think about that nuance of the battle. And so, um, taking a step back, being a native of Concord, Massachusetts, was how'd you fall into the material culture side? It just kind of always interested, or just
Well, I
yeah.
I grew up behind where Merriam's Corner is in Concord. And so my elementary school was right in the route that the militia and the minute companies took from North Bridge to Merriam's Corner. And as a 7-year-old, I got hooked on April 19th and reading about it. And then all of our field trips were to places like the Concord Museum or Minuteman National Park or Lexington Historical Society. So I got to see all these objects. And for me, reading about them was one thing, but the material culture is what really made it stick and sink in. It makes it dimensional. You can actually see a musket or a fowling piece that was used, or another object, or even a document, original document from the period, and it really helped to bring it to life. And that just over the years, I just grew more and more passionate about it.
And so as you went through the book, I mean, you did mention earlier Parker's Revenge, and um, that site. Can you walk us through? I know the history of like where it was, where the Park Service initially said it was, and then where it is today. That is just a fascinating story, and that's all due to archaeology and material culture changing. And so I know
Well,
a lot of our yeah,
that
yeah,
was an
sorry.
interesting one because it was General Gavin in his book Minutemen where he talked about where he thought that spot was. And then other historians just followed along with what Gavin had said. And as a high school kid, we used to go up there all the time, and that's where I thought it was, and we used to party up there actually. But it's just such a horrible spot for troops. It's a rocky outcrop, and there's a really bad drop on the south side of it. And so it just, I don't know, it didn't really make sense. But when we went in there to do the archaeology project, that was the first area we searched. And we searched it, heavily with cross transects and whole teams of people. And all we found up there were remnants of people partying. So there was pull tabs, roach clips, all this stuff, but there was no residue of battle. But as we moved to the north, all of a sudden we started to get into musket fire, a musket shot, fowling piece shot. And after the first week, we had a few balls. And then the second and third weeks, it really came together as we started to find more, and we could find basically the firing line from where more than likely Lexington fired down towards the flankers who were coming towards them, and there was almost a line of shot from fowling pieces down there, which was really really neat. They were popping out of the ground that day like candy. So it was just those moments when you can actually look around and see how it makes sense, where that landscape actually made really good sense for Parker to get in with his company, fire, and then retreat and go to another spot and shoot again.
For those that are watching who have not made it up to Parker's Revenge, could you just explain what do you mean by you found fouling pieces and the terrain? Was it as wooded as it was but in 1775 that we have today, or
It's
yeah, just
more
kind of explain.
wooded now.
No, okay.
Yeah, it's more
Yeah.
wooded now than it was then. And I'm sure a lot of the people who are listening understand, Captain Parker's company after the devastation on Lexington Green in the morning. They take care of their dead and wounded, form back up, and march towards the British who were in Concord and marching back. And they find a position to shoot at the column, and that's, presumably the spot.
And so when you found these remains of fouling pieces or so forth, what residue is left over? Like, I mean, or is
Well,
it just the flintlocks that you found, or
no, it's the ammunition from
ammunition?
fouling pieces. Yeah. So it's fouling piece shot. So we're finding the residue of the battle. We're finding the ammunition that was fired or not fired and left behind.
And did you, oh, the bottom of Parker's Run, did you find a lot of I mean, the British were carrying as the flankers come in? Was it more scattered, or did you kind of pick out a line, or did the British just move quickly through and left debris?
Well, it seems like from what we found that Parker's company was up higher on the ridge. They fired at the flankers. They turned and took off to go to another spot, and the British were firing at them going up the hill as Parker's company retreated or went to the next spot. So the flankers were actually shooting at them as they're taking off to go shoot again.
So, I mean, remarkable at first. I mean, just taking a step back and really, Parker's able to get men after the devastation in the morning to still stay. These are farmers and townspeople, not trained soldiers. So it talks about Parker's great, I guess, command presence to get them, and it would make sense that he would use a terrain like that, not being closer to the road, but finding an area to keep his men safe.
Oh yeah, it made total sense. Once we started to find it, we could look around and say, "Wow, yeah, this is a great spot. This is a good spot to be." And yeah, the fact that Parker was able to march out there after what happened and fight for the rest of the day says something about the people of Lexington and all of the people that day. I mean, there were years of pent up frustration that finally came out on April 19th.
And so, as you guys work through this with, I think, with Dr. Wilkes, Margaret Wilkes, and all that, um, what's the time? I mean, I know I work for the National Park Service. I know what it's like to start doing archaeological studies and the compliance and so forth. But for those that are listening and watching, this is not an overnight thing. How many months or years? You just put like a time frame of how much went into finding and changing Parker's Revenge location.
And before we even got out there, as you know, there was years of permitting and getting all that process squared away, planning, budgeting. There was a lot that went into it before we ever went out on the site. Um, but once we went out on the site, we spent 2 years out there basically to do the projects and then record the data. And then after that, it was also okay. Now, how do we interpret this? So that the park rangers can, the staff can use this information and interpret it properly to the public who visits. So it was, by the time we were done, it was probably 3 or 4 years through the whole process.
And is there a part that I mean, was there an aha factor for someone who'd grown up and studied this the whole life, or was it like, okay, this made sense, nothing
No,
surprising?
the whole thing was an aha factor. I mean, I got to tell you, even when it was freezing cold or we were covered in poison ivy or ticks, it was incredible every minute of the day to be out there. There were a few times where you'd, be dying of the heat and want to just get in the air conditioning, but you stuck it out because of what we were doing. And it's been like that on all of the projects that we've done at Minuteman and at other sites. And the other thing that I should probably say before we go any further with that is metal detection on park property is illegal. And
Like,
you should not be out there. People that do that are looters, and what they do is they take information. They're all excited to have a musket ball, but we need that data. That information that's in the ground gives us information about the arms. It tells us, gives us an idea of what happened, the fighting there, how severe was it. So that material that's left is really important. Just figured I should get that out there.
we for all the park rangers listening and myself, we appreciate the having worked in multiple battlefields and telling people can't metal detect. So thank you for reinforcing that message there. But so before we move from Parker's Revenge, any closing thoughts on this part? I don't want to not give it its complete due.
No, no, I think we've got a lot to talk about. Parker's is only a tiny bit of the story. That's where, I mean, it's an important one, but that's kind of where this process of getting into the book came from. So, um, there's a lot more that we did and have done and will continue to do. So,
So yeah, let's dive in. I mean, I figured the two most obvious starting points would either be the Russell House because anyone who goes there can put their fingers in the bullet holes, or Parker's Revenge. So we'll leave Russell House for the end since people know about that. But yeah, take us through the 50,000 foot view of the book. I don't want to give everything away because people need to
right.
actually go out and buy the book, but kind of some of the highlights for you as you went through this, getting the process.
So we actually started because Jason Russell was where we came up with the idea. We started there and we did that study first. However, the way we laid it out in the book was chronologically. So the first shot was one that I used to stare at as a kid at the Elisha Jones house in Concord, which is a national park owned structure. It's private property. And when I was a kid, the superintendent of the park lived there, and his son was an elementary school classmate. So we used to go run around in the shed that's there with a bullet hole in it, and always wondered, is it really a bullet hole? But we actually recreated that. That's the other thing that was a huge part of this was the live fire validation study. We had 18th century house sections made up, and we actually replicated the shots. The Elisha Jones was the first one supposedly fired from a British light infantryman retreating from North Bridge, who took a shot at the shed, which was detached from the house. Now it's attached. They dragged it up in 1865 and connected it to the house. But at the time, it was further to the north. And so we recorded that, and then we decided to go through some of the other objects. So there was the James Hayward powder horn from Acton. James Hayward was a 25-year-old school teacher, a member of one of the Acton militia companies, and he marched along. He was at the Northbridge fight, but he was in the militia company, so we would have been a little further back than all the minute companies were. And at Fisk Hill in Lexington, he purportedly stopped to get a drink at a well, and a British soldier who had been looting the Fisk house came out. They both fired at each other. British soldier was killed instantly, and Hayward was mortally wounded, shot through his powder horn. So that horn was brought back with his body, got passed down through the family, and ended up in the Acton Memorial Library. So that was one of the other highlights of the thing. You know, I had seen it in a case a million times, but going up there and taking it out of the case, measuring the bullet hole, and photographing it was, you know, one of those really cool moments that you get
Uh,
to, you know, yeah, handling an object like that. So we've got a chapter in there on Hayward and the horn and the well and where was the well at the time. Then we go back down through Lexington. There's another private home there, the Merritt Monroe House. And there was a bullet found in 1915 lodged in an attic rafter, which had been plucked out. And it's actually in the Lexington Historical Society across the street at Buckman, or at least it was on display there. I don't remember where if they put it in another display now for the 250th, but we found some information about the house in 1915 and other bullet holes that had been found. Buckman Tavern, the front door survives, which has a bullet strike in it. When we've looked at some of the fighting, you know, as the British are retreating, the fighting is getting heavier and heavier. And by the time they get into Lexington Center, you get Percy's Relief coming up with two pieces of artillery. And at that point, the fighting gets really, really bad. So there were a lot of structures at the time that were shot up. Many of them are gone now. But at the time, it would have been devastating to see the landscape.
especially any remains, I mean, of the artillery fire. I know they're small caliber, but were there any structures in the area that either were torn down that were noted before or still standing that might have had artillery damage? Just curious.
Yeah, the meeting house, which was on Lexington Common, was hit. And purportedly, the cannonball was found by a guy named Levi Harrington after the battle and ended up at Harvard College. Haven't found it yet. But they were two 6-pounders. So they were small, but still decent size. And there have been 6-pound shot found around Lexington Center. I'm pretty sure that the Scottish Rite Museum has one, and I think Lexington Historical may have one, and I think Arlington have two that were purportedly from April 19th. But we know that structure was hit by artillery fire. There were probably others, but again, they're all gone now. And there's no others that are recorded. They did seem to record a lot of the bullet strikes. And in the 19th century, extensive newspaper searches took place for this book too. And in those newspaper searches, we found stuff about structures that we didn't even know about, you know, being shot up and taken down. So, so yeah, there was a lot of devastation after the British, as the British left Lexington.
You could pull one of those one house's devastation that had just an amazing story that was taken down to give a highlight of the extensive research. What would it be?
So
Putting you on the spot.
the I would say for me, one of the favorites, because there are pieces that survive, is the Captain William Adams house, which was in the Cambridge Village of Menotomy, kind of diagonally across from the Jason Russell house. And it was shot up pretty badly. And in 1855, they were making room for the railroad to go through Lexington and into Lexington. And they took down a section of the house. Then they took down the rest of it. And the owner was selling the bullets and pieces of bullet struck wood as he was taking it down. And people were paying between 50 cents or a dollar for a bullet or a piece of bullet struck wood. And so, and again, that's 1855. 50 cents and a dollar was a lot of money.
Yeah.
But there's a front door panel that survives in the Arlington Historical Society from the Captain William Adams house. There's a couple of bullets that survive. There's a piece of bullet struck sheathing. And recently, this past Christmas, after the book was published, of course, it had just come in. I got a text from someone that there was a piece of a bullet struck house up for auction at a little auction house up in the North Shore, Massachusetts. And as soon as I saw the pictures of it, it was a piece that had been listed in the newspaper in 1855. That was in our book. And that piece, that 4 inch by 2 inch piece of bullet struck wood, ended up selling for about $30,000. So that
Uh,
tells you the interest.
yeah, the interest, and that's a lot of book sales, right? The 40 to 30,000.
Yeah,
um,
well, luckily I didn't end up with it. There were other people, I had other friends who were bidding on it, but I don't think anybody expected it to go that high.
uh, just I wonder if it has anything to do. I mean, with the interest of the 250th, maybe raising it up
Oh yeah.
or so forth
Well,
as well.
well, April 19th is a hot topic, and with the 250th coming up, I'm sure that helped. But there's a lot of people that are interested in the first day of the American Revolution, even Bunker Hill, the siege of Boston.
The proverbial shots heard around the world, and so
Hmm.
that was actually still staying on the topic of the bullet holes and so forth. Chapter three is, do we know it's a bullet hole? Thought it was a very provocative title for a chapter. Can you seems pretty common. It looks like a bullet hole. I mean, I guess why, how? I don't know the exact way to ask the question. I just thought it
Well,
was an interesting chapter title.
well, inevitably, whenever I give a talk on the bullet strikes, someone will raise their hand and go, "Well, how do you know it's a bullet hole?" And so, okay, well, we'll tell you how we know. They make specific. They do bullets do specific things when they hit certain objects. Wood, it almost leaves a perfectly round hole going in, and it blows out the back. When you fire at modern wood, it acts differently, obviously, because of the growth. Is different today in wood than it was back then with all the old growth stuff. The pines and chestnuts and stuff were a lot harder than they are today. So we actually used original wood that was in really great shape that we had donated to us that were built into structure sections so we could actually shoot them and replicate, like I said, the Elisha Jones house or any of the others, and you could see the damage and kind of look at it compared to the originals and see the blowout. But we wanted to add a chapter in there that kind of explained a little bit about that type of stuff. And the beginning was a good place to put that. We ended up putting in the shooting incident reconstruction stuff, which is a little more sciencey towards the back, so that if you really wanted to read it, you could read it. But we didn't want to,
Yes, history and
bore.
science sometimes doesn't go, yeah,
Well, it
together.
does, but at the same time, the book, hopefully, from people that I know that have read it, there's science people that are reading it. There's historians that are reading it. There are antique arms collectors who are reading it. It's a broad audience, and we wanted to make sure that, when we do archaeology papers for reports and stuff, they're written totally differently because it's a different audience. But we wanted it to be readable for anybody and have as little or as much information as you wanted in the book.
No, and absolutely. And if you just take a cursory glance on the reviews, I mean, people love the imagery that connected it in, the graphics, the detail, or even for someone like myself who's written on the subject, read through it, some of the breakdowns of the muskets and descriptions of what the men were carrying was some of the best I've seen. So there is something like correct. There is something in there for multiple interest levels. So. Um, I was
Yeah,
like
and
nervous initially when I flipped through them because I always kind of go to the back to see the footnotes and everything, and started reminding me of a like geometry class or something with some of the symbol. I was like, I'm uh-oh, but I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I actually read it in about a day and a half. So
yeah, and it's important again to talk and to understand the bullet strikes, you have to understand the guns and the ballistics. How do the guns function? And not just, okay, it's a flintlock and the flint sparks on the hammer, sets off the charge. We know that. Everybody knows that for the most part. But literally talking about the ballistics of the gun, if you have a bore of this size, based upon, you got to have windage then. So you're going to have a ball that's smaller than the bore. So you're going to have a ball that's not going to be very accurate. But what does that ball, the size of the ball tell us about the guns, and same with the bullet hole. So we tried to tie all of this stuff together to, because we needed to, as far as the bullet strikes go.
So, yeah, and so diving into that subject, you talk about there's two primary weapons that the British rank and file are carrying, if I'm correct. A 1756 long land and a 1769 short land, correct?
Yeah, yeah. So the enlisted men, many of the light infantry had been issued pattern 1769 shortlands, which have a 42-inch barrel, and 1771. So the light infantry companies had been issued those first. Some of the other companies, battalion and grenadier companies, had started to be issued some of those, but a lot of those guys are still carrying pattern 1756 longlands with a 46-inch barrel. Um, Ballistics wise, they're about the same. They fire the same size shot, which again, the shot in a British musket, according to the manual, is 0.693, the musket ball. But archaeologically, when we've studied them, they weren't that close. They're between 0.67 and 0.67 or 0.71. So you've got a little bit of variation in the size of the ammo. The bores, in the back of the book, we did a bore study of about 80 original muskets in really good condition. And everybody will tell you that the bore on a Brown Bess or pattern 6956 is 0.75 caliber, and that's not true. They range between 0.75 and 0.84. So when you think about that and you're putting a much smaller ball and a bore that can be bigger, you're going to lose a lot of accuracy when you fire. So again, it's important to understand the standard types of arms that are being carried. Now, then you also have sergeants who are carrying carbines, and officers who are carrying fusils of a smaller bore. But again, the majority of the men, the enlisted men, are going to be carrying those fairly standard muskets.
And is there a rhyme? I mean, because these gunsmiths are making them, I mean, or the pre-industrial revolution, is that why the bores, or does it deal with heat, or just
Well, no, the way that they were made. So today, when you buy a musket or make a barrel of a gun, it's made from a solid piece of steel, and you drill out your bore. But in the 18th century and into the 19th century, the firearms were made from a piece of flat iron, and they were welded around a mandrel. So they would weld it into a barrel from flat stock, then bore it and file it. And so they look really nice. They're bright for the most part when they were new. Obviously, not today with some of the originals, but you look at them and you would think they're all the same size, but they're not because of the way that they were made. They just couldn't. They couldn't. They just didn't have the ability to make them that perfect, nor did they need to, because of windage, the way that they had to fire the guns. So you had to load your ammunition with a ball that was smaller, like I said, than the bore, because if you fire a few times and the ball is too tight, it's going to jam up in the bore of the gun. So you would fire a ball that was a lot smaller, and even the American, the provincial forces in May of '75, there's a memorandum of camp rules that go around, and one of them says that you're to be able to load your cartridge down the bore of your gun without drawing your ramrod. So the musket ball is supposed to be that small that it's able to fall from the breech to from the muzzle to the breech without using your ramrod. So there's a lot of space in there for the ball to move around when you're firing.
and so I mean, and as that comes, that's why they say 100 yards would have been amazing for these things to come out, right?
It depends on the guns. So one of the things we weren't necessarily in our live fire study shooting for accuracy. However, we did have a target we were pointing at. And as we were shooting, I have a couple of provincial fowling pieces, custom built fowling pieces, and one of them has a 55-inch barrel and a 62-inch bore. And that gun at 100 yards hit the target in the torso every shot, no matter who was shooting it. Whereas some of the other guns, the balls kind of danced around, and even with the fowling piece, we put different size balls in it. Some of them were a lot smaller than the bore, and we were still getting the same result. Whether it was the 55-inch barrel, might have been, but it was kind of incredible compared to the other muskets, because we didn't just shoot fowling pieces; we shot French muskets. We had a Potsdam musket, reproduction, Potsdam musket. We had carbines, fusils. We were shooting all different types of guns when we did our first studies. And by the way, the studies are available for free on the American Society of Arms Collectors website under resources. There's a link there, and you can download the 3 ballistic studies that we've done for free there.
And so, I mean, as you do these ballistic studies, anything, does it change your interpretation, narrative? Does it reinforce what you thought? I mean, as we talk about material culture on April 19th, we always hear these, I mean, hurried shots and so forth, and widely inaccurate. Does those ballistic
Yeah, and
tests?
they pretty much it pretty much shows that there were a lot of things that we didn't anticipate as far as you read certain accounts in the 1850s. There was 1855. There was a book called The Theory of Musketry, an English book, and they thought that the ball bounced in the barrel as it came out because of the windage, because the ball was smaller. But one of the things we found is that it doesn't necessarily do that. What it does is it when you go to the present and you go to fire, gravity pushes that ball down onto the bottom of the bore. And when you fire the gun, the gases escape over the ball and push the ball, and it scrapes the bore coming out. So when we're doing archaeology projects, we're finding musket balls with what we call compression banding from scraping the bore. And sometimes you can see marks where it had hit the top of the barrel once and then maybe scrape the bottom. So you might get a little bit of that movement, but not, the zigzag that everybody had thought. And then we find those on not only the ball we found at Parker's and other archaeology projects, but our own projects. So, we've learned a lot of things about things that probably a lot of people really wouldn't care about with, like compression banding and different marks on the balls. But for us, I found it extremely fascinating. And that's why we're continuing to plan more ballistic studies because there's more things we have to shoot and more things we have to figure out.
And so, I mean, someone through a ballistic study, for those who, we have a lot of military historians, but a lot of people that's not familiar with what a ballistic study. Do you do at different paces? Do you do it at different angles? Do you try to replicate what happened on April 19th?
So the last one we did was related to the book, and that was a live fire validation study. So that was shooting at objects or house structures. So we actually shot at powder horns. We shot it to replicate the James Hayward horn. We shot at the structures. We did a couple of other things. One was we replicated to the best of our ability the wound that John Robbins, who was in the Lexington militia, he was shot in the back of the neck on April 19th as he retreated and blew his lower jaw out. And we got a ballistics gelatin bust with bone simulant and recreated that shot. But before that, a lot of the other shots we were shooting at ballistics gelatin with layers of cloth on the front because archaeologically musket balls had been found with a cloth imprint. And instantly everybody said, "Oh, that's from patching." Well, yeah, there can be patch marks on a ball from using a cloth patch. However, these musket balls had powder stippling on one side where the powder charge had been, and cloth imprint on the other. So we actually replicated that, so you could see the weave of the cloth in the musket ball after it had gone through the cloth, and you could tell whether it was fine, like superfine broadcloth. You could see if it was common broadcloth by the weave. And twill woven, we shot at Kersey and replicated, that twill weave on the Kersey that would show up on the soft lead. The other things we did, God, we've done so much. Like I said, it's in all of those reports. And again, there'll be stuff in there that people are like boring, but then there's some stuff in there that I think is pretty fascinating. We wrote down a bunch of our ideas, what we wanted to do, and then as we were in the field, we'd come up with more. So some of the stuff we actually tried to replicate. There were a couple of mini balls found at Little Round Top during an archaeological dig we worked on in the temporary burying ground with twill woven cloth imprint on. And we actually did some mini ball stuff and replicated that also. So, some of the studies we did went a little bit awry of April 19th, but we wanted to try and squeeze in as much as we could. The other thing that we did is we rented a Phantom high-speed camera. And if anybody watched the Nova episode that we did on Revolutionary War weapons, that's the camera that was used to get those high-speed, the slow-mo shots of the bullets going through the gelatin. And it's great not only for the footage, but we can use that with a computer program to calculate the velocity, the muzzle velocity of the bullets. So we recorded all that data using high-speed cameras, and then all of that video footage gave us great stuff to use in talks, presentations on the bullet strike stuff. So we did a whole bunch of different things.
And then one just kind of not silly question, but light question. How much does your shoulder hurt after all of this?
So it after a while, yeah, after a while it wears on you. We picked certain people to be shooters and certain people to be range safety people. And so we'd switch out a little bit here and there. And it wasn't too bad by switching out. After a while, you get a bruise on your shoulder. But one of the tests that we did was with the double ball load, because you see people talk about during the period that, oh, I put two balls in the gun, and they thought that they would have better stopping power by putting two balls in. And we tested that theory because we knew that it was incorrect. That, yeah, you can put the two balls in the gun, but it changes the ballistics, it changes the velocities, and it really made the velocity drop. However, what it did do was give you one hell of a bruise on your shoulder when you fired it. So I definitely don't ever want to do that again. But we collected some great data from it.
So so it seemed like they would. I mean, they would have trouble with the. Well, I guess they stacked them one after the other. Bullets fired out. Wouldn't the momentum, the first one stop the second one coming out? I mean, like
So
slow it
no,
down.
it would slow it. So that normally with a single shot, I'll just pick an average velocity, because there's so many variables in the velocity of these guns based upon windage, like we talked about, the size of the ball, how much powder goes in. A soldier can dump more powder in the pan than down the barrel or spill some. So there's a lot of variables. But say an average on the pattern 1756 was 945 feet per second. Then the first ball and the double ball shot would come out at about 650, and then the second ball would come out about 270 and drop on the ground 50 feet from the muzzle of the gun. So the second ball would completely lose. The first one could still kill. The velocity dropped a lot, but the second ball just basically fell on the ground 50 yards from the target.
So good idea, and maybe in theory, but not in practice when you're
Yeah,
thinking, yeah.
yeah, in theory. And I just read an account of a guy who was at Bunker Hill. He's talking in 1825 about fighting during the battle. He was at the cornerstone ceremony, that when they were laying the cornerstone of the monument, and he's talking about how, I fired two ball at the British. And there are other accounts of people talking about doing that, but it sounds great, but it doesn't work.
And so with this, like the trajectory analysis and everything going, what any did it? I guess when I went to the Russell House, they talked about the one bullet that went almost through what two or three of the top floors walls. That your analysis of what you're doing with these ballistic testing kind of say that was a more standard, or is that an anomaly of having that much firepower?
It would depend on where the shot came from and what it hit. So we looked at in the book, we did it. We had a 3D laser scan done of the whole house and property, and we were able to take a cross section of the house, and we used it to put in all of our trajectories, and you can see where each of the shots came from. So yeah, you have shots that are consistent with coming from soldiers who are on Mass Ave in the main column firing at the house and going through the windows, one upstairs, and it goes through the wall panel, and then it reaches terminal velocity by hitting the attic stair riser behind the wall, which we were able to actually get up inside there and photograph. You have other guys who were shooting directly right outside the house. There's one outside of the kitchen that went through the siding, the clapboard, it went through a panel inside, went across the room, went through another panel, and then skipped off the ceiling. So, again, some of that stuff depends on how close they are, as far as how far it'll go in the house. There's another one of a British soldier firing, more than likely coming up the stairs, and it went almost through one of the newel posts, one of those big, thick newel posts. And it looks like it must have been pried out, and then they just filled it in with plaster, because it didn't have enough to go all the way through that oak post. But that's a pretty thick post for it to go completely through. I don't care how close you were to it. Um, but again, that going through and looking at the Jason Russell house and the trajectories, it really goes together with some of the accounts that there are. There's an account that I transcribed in the book, and it's from a British officer of the 4th Regiment of Foot. He's unknown. He didn't sign the letter, but he's describing the fighting, and he actually goes inside the Jason Russell house, and he talks about 3 men being shot around him as he gets into the house. And he also talks about the fact that many of their own men were shooting each other by mistake. So you'd have guys in houses and British soldiers outside and on the road shooting at the houses and shooting some of their own men. So it was just brutal. It was brutal fighting on the way back. And again, that's one of the things we really wanted to show in the book was how heavy the fighting was and how bad it was.
Yeah, and I mean you guys captured very well and accurately and so forth. Because when doing interpretation or whatever the Park Service, you talk about like as they get there, I mean the British are losing command cohesion a little bit. They're getting tired, they're getting ragged, but also I mean these shots are coming from everywhere, so it seems like they're shooting at shapes, whether that's a British soldier walking up the steps or an American or a provincial.
Yeah, they were just shooting at anything. And someone posted on social media the other day a comment about the book, and they were like, "Well, no, there wasn't that much stray shots. They were better than that." And it's like, "Well, have you read the book yet? Have you gone to the Jason Russell house?" And you gotta read these accounts, and you gotta go there to see the devastating damage to these places. And then read the accounts afterwards. There's one Reverend David McClure who talks about he goes out to Lexington on the morning of the 20th, and it starts to rain, so he turns around at the meeting house and goes back, and he describes the devastation out there with dead animals and walls thrown down and buildings burned and glass shot out and dead soldiers around, British soldiers mostly. It's horrible, you know.
And I mean, oh, it is, and I mean, it's a running fight, and it's a continuous fight, and I'm always surprised. Maybe this is just one of those other silly or obvious statements that the British rank and file have musket balls still left by the time they get all the way down there. Do you see evidence along the way? I mean, we always hear they fire maybe what 20%, 25% of what they carry. That
Well, purportedly, Lieutenant Colonel Smith's column that had been in Concord and was marching back to Lexington was almost out of ammunition by the time they got to Lexington, and they were ordered to have 36 rounds with them. Then Percy shows up, and his men are ordered to have 36 rounds with them too. So yeah, they're pretty much shooting most of the ammunition. It seems like that they have. More ammunition had been sent for, but it was captured in Menotomy prior to the column getting back through there. So the British soldiers are running out of ammunition pretty quickly, and it's after that point when the siege of Boston begins that General Gage orders all the British soldiers to carry 60 rounds. And so they're to make bladders to hold cartridges in to put in their pocket wherever they can to keep the cartridges safe, but they're to have 60 rounds of ammunition.
And that's that's almost double of what that's an amazing that's what you hear. I mean, obviously in later wars, the 50, 60, 70 rounds of
Yeah, yeah,
ammunition.
with 40 rounds, Civil War stuff, yeah, but on April 19th, 36 for the British, and provincials are all over the place. Some of their cartridge boxes hold 17 rounds, some of them hold 19 rounds. Some of them are using powder horns and shot pouches filled with shot. That letter from the unknown British officer of the 4th Regiment of Foot I mentioned talked about a dead provincial laying there, and he counted 73 balls in his bag and that he had 2 horns of powder. So there are some provincials who are literally loaded for bear, um, but they had to have enough to keep them going for a while. But again, a lot of them were shooting it up, and again, not every shot hit its mark. That's the other thing that people don't understand is there was a project we did a couple of years ago at the North Bridge. It was a compliance project, but we ended up finding 5 musket balls that looked like they had been fired from the west side of the bridge by provincials, and one of them had the compression banding on it, and none of them were highly deformed because they had reached terminal velocity and landed in soft ground. They just never hit anything. And people just couldn't believe that these, nope, nope, you guys are idiots. Those balls have not been fired because they would have hit something. So not every shot that was fired on April 19th hit its mark.
And talking about provincials, any surprising finds from bullets or whatever that were? I mean, we know what generally they carried, but any kind of outliers?
No, not really. I mean, we've there are a lot of guns that had a lot smaller bores than I would have anticipated. There are some with half-inch bores. So if you're firing a gun that has a half-inch bore, I mean, that sounds huge in today's terms. Oh my God, that's a 50 caliber, but you got to figure you're going to fire a smaller ball. So it'd be about, maybe a 44, 45 caliber ball that would come out of it. Um, but so there were a lot of filing pieces that did have smaller bores, and we see that in the archaeological evidence. Um, but the other thing that we did is we didn't just depend upon the archaeology; we also depended upon document research at Mass Archives and other institutions, digging up information where they talk about the size of the ammunition, everything that are being issued and used. The other thing is we've tracked down, and I get contacts about guns that were carried on April 19th in Bunker Hill all the time that I'm going out and researching and photographing so that we can collect all that data and add to it. So, there's just a mess of guns that are being carried from the 50 caliber, fouling piece for shooting at, foul birds to big bore, possibly built with 17th century barrels or, old Dutch guns that are just massive. There was one ball that we found on a project that was a 80 caliber ball. It was huge, and it hit a rock at high velocity. So it was fired from fairly close to where that rock was. But man, that thing was massive. You know, so there's all sorts of weird guns being carried.
And so as we get on near the end of the hour here or so, just want to kind of open it up. Anything that I haven't asked or discussed that you would like to share, not
No,
giving
I
away
think
too much.
I think one of the things that I try to get across with this stuff is, it's all great to go out, like April 19th, we just had the anniversary. There's bunting and parades and all that stuff. That's fantastic. But we also have to realize that there were a lot of people who were killed, wounded, and their lives forever changed. And that's one of the things that we really want to impress upon people. And that's why I think the book is important, is it brings some of the harsh reality back to a very patriotic and important event.
No, I think it's a good job. I mean, the scientific approach takes away some of that emotionalism or the history of memory and puts it in that, hey, what these killing machines on their arms did, and everything, and what it meant to fire or the load, and understand that you are firing at something to potentially take that life.
Yeah, and the other one last thing that I would say is, people think about, and this is one thing that my colleague Doug Scott and I talk about a lot. People today think of muskets as, oh, they're antiques. And I remember when I went to buy my first musket and I was 13, and my mother was like, oh yeah, that's okay, it's just a musket. You can't hurt anybody with that. It's like, yeah, okay, I'm not going to complain. But these guns, a lot of them, some of them were old, some of them were built from parts that were old and new. But a lot of these guns were the modern technology of the day. So you got to think about it in those terms too. These were meant for killing people. And obviously they worked.
Yeah, very good. And so, as we wrap up here with Joel, the book that he co-authored with Douglas Scott, Bullet Strikes from the First Day of the American Revolution. Obviously, it's available online and so forth. But any upcoming engagements, speaking engagements, book signings that people may be able to catch you and raise that question of how do you know that's a bullet hole?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I've got one in Newburyport, Mass, which will be passed by the time this comes out. There's a whole bunch of them coming. I think if you do some searches online, you can find them. There's one in Dedham, coming up. But there'll be a lot more. I get contacted all the time now about this, so we'll be doing. I think my colleague right now is in. I can't remember whether he's in Oklahoma or somewhere out there giving a bullet strike talk tonight as we're doing this. So
There you go, divide and conquer.
yeah,
And so with with that, I'd like to once again thank you, Joel, for taking the time to sit down with us here at the Virgin Revolutionary War to talk about this book. And please go out and if you're interested in any aspect of the American Revolution, especially the beginning, do make this part of your library as you move forward. Now, this is posted. We want to wish everyone a happy Memorial Day. We are going to have a little break in our revelry because we have folks going out to the Great Bridge battlefield for a symposium on Saturday, May 31st. But we actually return back to Joel's neck of the woods in June when we talk about Bunker Hill. And so now we'll know a little bit more about what was fired down the hill or up the hill there. So um, before I do let you go, Joel, since our next big revelry is on Bunker Hill, any cool story you want to share about bullet strikes or arms from that battle?
yeah. Well, I'm not going to share them yet. There's an upcoming project that's going on with City of Boston Archaeology that I'm working with them on. And what I'm hoping is that by fall, there might be some really interesting Bunker Hill information that we can share. And I'll keep you posted.
Sounds good. So there's a teaser. Maybe we'll have to get Joel back on after fall to see what that news is. But pay attention to the emerging Revolutionary War. Check out Joel and Douglas's talks and Googling it or whatever search engine you want to use. But once again, everyone, have a great evening, and we'll see you back here in a few weeks.